I think a materialist approach to things is very, very consistent with my experience in Christian social justice.
I feel like the deeper I get into anarchist practice, the deeper my faith is getting at the same time.
I would hope that, securing means of life for all would be something all people of faith would say, oh yes, that's at the basis of what we believe.
And those who are most marginalized know the most about the true, the good, and the beautiful.
To me, it's less that I think building class solidarity is a bad thing, as much as it seems like if you don't attend to things like anti-Black racism, that's always going to get in the way of building class solidarity, actually.
And when you go back, you find that a lot of revolutionary grassroots participatory movements, the precursors to what you could call the barrio assemblies and these grassroots neighborhood organizations, a lot of these were sponsored by the church.
What does it mean to say that the Christian tradition is internally contradictory and there are antagonisms there and you're always being faithful to some aspects and betraying other aspects?
Welcome to the Magnificast, a podcast about Christianity and leftist politics. I'm Dean Detlaff, a PhD student at the Institute for Christian Studies in Toronto.
And I'm Matt Bernico. I teach media studies at Greenville University in Greenville, Illinois. But this week, I'm not in Greenville, Illinois at all. I'm in Toronto, Canada.
Here we are. We're cruising around town. We're seeing all the sights. We're going to all the places, all your favorite landmarks of Toronto.
It's so hot.
It's pretty hot. Even when it rains, it's hot right now.
It rained a lot yesterday, and it was just hot rain.
Yeah, it was hot rain. My apartment is hot. We live above a coffee shop, so I feel like all the heat from the coffee just comes up. It rises into our apartment, and it stays here.
Yeah, that's right. Hey, so this week we're not going to do a Reddit goof because we did a goof that was in real life that's even bigger than any Reddit goof that you could possibly do. So
sorry, wait, I have to interrupt you because it's so hot that I'm watching Matt's glasses fog up in real time as we're talking. That's how hot it is. The windows are closed. The windows are closed to keep out the bus noises. The fans are off to give you all that good audio quality. And I just want you to know that we're suffering for the cause.
We are suffering for the cause and suffering for Jesus right here. For real, then.
All right, as you're saying.
As I was saying, we didn't do a Reddit goof this week because we did the biggest goof on ourselves, and we went to a restaurant that is absolutely bizarre, and I don't know how else to respond to it and process through this trauma other than just talking about it openly and honestly on this podcast.
Yep.
So we went to a restaurant in Toronto called Garfield Eats.
You can't imagine it. That's how I feel.
Try.
Yeah. Even if someone tells you about it, you don't know what it is.
You could say it's a Garfield themed pizza restaurant, but it is, but it just doesn't even do it justice.
No, a Garfield-themed pizza restaurant is not... Selling it short would be the wrong way to phrase it, but misrepresenting it would be for sure true.
It's so much more and so much less, actually.
Yeah, if you're a podcast person, if you like podcasts, you may have heard of Garfield Eats already from My Brother and Me, which is a podcast we like to listen to, and they did a whole... It was so wild to them that they sacrificed an entire half of their episode or more to just talking about Garfield Eats and how crazy it is.
And it was so wild to us, we sacrificed our bodies to go eat it. And we did it. We got the Garfuccino, we got a big pizza, and we ate it in a park, and, I don't feel great about it. Now, on this side of the decision, I think maybe we shouldn't have.
Here's the thing, though. It's hard to discern what the real culprit is, what the real cause of this bodily trauma might be, because we went to Garfield Eats and we followed that up with another product of late capitalism, and that is a place called The Poop Cafe.
The Poop Cafe is unreal.
It's themed after poop emojis, but also just poop in general. It's also, again, hard to explain. If you order a coffee, you get it in a little toilet.
If you order food, it also comes in a toilet.
If you order a waffle, it looks like a little poop.
So there's a lot going on here in this trip. Lots of weird culinary adventures. Yeah. It's really a Baudrillardian experience. I can't really say anything else about it. It's just it's an ineffable experience.
Yeah, what possessed us to do it is not entirely clear still to me now, but it just seems like if you're a communist and you spend all your time thinking about how crazy capitalism is, sometimes you just have to see for yourself. It's crazy when you're suffering under it, but it's also crazy in the kinds of things that it makes up. Under the guise of freedom, people's political freedom, two people had to file business licenses for these two businesses. At Toronto City Council right now on the books, there's a piece of paper somewhere that says the Poop Cafe with like a business license, and they got it. Someone awarded it to them. It's the same with Garfield Eats.
It's bad.
It's bad.
The capitalist conception of freedom is being able to open a restaurant that's called the Poop Cafe, and if that's not an argument for socialism, I don't know what is.
Listen, it's bad, but also I did eat all the ice cream.
I did too, and I'm not mad about it.
It was fine.
I feel sickly and bad. My body is revolting against me, but it was good ice cream.
There was a whole gaggle of children, and they were having a good time.
That's true. Okay, well, so that's what we did. We did a lot of that, but we're also going to do a podcast right now.
Wait. We did something cooler. We did something related to this whole situation. We went to the Games Workers Union.
That's right.
Games Workers Industry thing, but we were there for the union.
That's right.
Yeah, we went to a really great panel about organizing and video games and media in general, the media industry. Guess what? Also bad. Bad for different reasons. Still capitalism.
That's true, but guess what? There's a really good way out of all that badness, and that's just to join a union.
Yep. A good friend of ours, Daniel Joseph, maybe someday we'll find an excuse to get him on this podcast, but he does really great work in media studies, but he is working with the Games Workers Union, so if you're a person who's in that industry or whatever, I mean, we have it in good authority that they're cool.
Yeah, so just do a big Google search for Game Workers Union, and you can find some good stuff. Man, the coolest thing is that they have these like pamphlets that are about the Game Workers Union, but they look like issues of Nintendo Power.
Yeah,
and there's one that has like Animal Crossing characters on it, and like Tom Nook is like the boss. And there's another one that has Waluigi on it, which is also pretty good too.
It's really good. The aesthetic is great.
Yeah,
they know what they're doing. It's good propaganda.
It's fantastic. So all you game workers out there, this is your chance to get unionized. What a cool thing.
All right, that was just to establish our socialist cred after those mistakes.
So we did both. We did two capitalist mistakes, but we did go to a big union thing. So it's pretty good.
It's pretty good. All right, that's not what we're talking about this week, though. This week, because we've just been running around really busy, we usually, when we have time to record something ourselves, we like to read a thing and think about that thing and try to think together about it. But this week, because we didn't have time to do that, we decided to talk more about a media phenomenon that we've both been seeing and thinking and talking about together for a while. And we're going to try to unpack that phenomenon a little bit using some of the tools that we have created or gathered or put together from other folks we've had on the Magnificast in the past. And this week, that media phenomenon is the question of whether or not Mike Pence, et al., is a real Christian or a fake Christian.
That's right. So in this episode, we're not going to read a new thing. We're just going to get more mileage out of the things we've already read. It's pretty good.
It's good. It's applied Magnificasting.
That's right. Magnificast applied. Well, okay. So at this point, the immigration situation along the United States southern border is hard to miss. You've probably all seen it on the internet, on the news. You've talked about it with your family and your pastors, and everyone has their bad takes and their good takes, and there's a pretty clear good one that they're bad. But whatever. The dehumanization and incarceration of immigrants from South and Central America has become a visible and pressing moral issue. If you don't see that in this podcast, it might not be for you.
You should see it. First episode.
Yeah, weird. If you're not convinced already, then this is a weird first episode. You saw people like Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez show up at the border and like kind of tour the prison and see the kids and cry looking at them, and a very important thing that illuminates kind of like what's going on there. It's good that she went. It's good that the other Democrat folks went too. No one would have known otherwise. Well, you would have suspected, but it's cool that they made it a more national conversation, I guess. Yeah, absolutely. They did that. It's a good thing. Right. So, Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez went to, some of those concentration camps, but then another person went too, who we're less thrilled about, and that's Vice President of the United States of America, Mike Richard Pence. I think that's really his middle name. I'm not sure though. Yeah. Well, sounds right. Didn't do my research. I think that was just what I scanned from Wikipedia. Incredibly uncreative white Protestant name. I guess he was born a Catholic, but nevertheless. Yeah. Well, there you go. So Mike Richard Pence, he went to the concentration camps in the U.S. Southwest. He went to, some that were overflowing with men immigrating, and it's just disgusting looking conditions. It looks bad. It looks like a bad situation. They need to be liberated immediately. But Mike Pence is, you probably saw that iconic photo of him looking over the crowd, just disapprovingly, unhappy. Every single article about it references how he looked chilly or icy, but I don't know, he looked grumpy.
Yeah, crabby and constipated.
Crabby and constipated. Like an old man showing up to a buffet and there's no shrimp left.
Yeah, it is like that, and it's actually a good analogy despite it being so banal, because that's exactly how he treats it, I think.
Yeah, like completely dispassionately. Yeah, totally. So, Mike Pence shows up to some of the same facilities that Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez visited a month ago, but had a radically different experience, right? Where Ocasio-Cortez reported on people in need of legal and medical aid, and they needed, like, hygiene. Pence saw a group of people who were being treated completely fairly, right? It's like this completely bonkers thing where two people are looking at the same thing and seeing drastically different pictures, and I wonder why.
Well, like, he admitted that he said it was overcrowded. That's the word that he used. But the implication is that there's too many people coming. That's the way he spun it. That the problem is that the problem is so huge that we might even need more of these.
Right. And, like, Ocasio-Cortez, I mean, and just, like, the general, like, the left in general, like, construed broadly as, like, you know, these camps are bad. Whereas Mike Pence is like, we need more money for beds.
Yeah, right.
No thanks.
Yeah.
Just let them out of there. That's crazy. Well, spinning out from these events is a conversation about the seeming lack of influence from Mike Pence's religious background, right? Mike Pence is, like Dean said, born Catholic, but extremely religious.
He's a Protestant now, the weird evangelical. He has some millenarian ideas about just some spooky stuff, spooky Bible stuff that you might have heard from spooky pastors you've met in your life about the end times and Christian legal discipline and all that kind of thing.
Right. Yeah, he's one of those weird, bad evangelicals, for sure. Yeah, but people are like, well, he's an evangelical, he's a Christian. Christianity influenced him so much, but he doesn't have any compassion for these people who are definitely the least of these. Like, what's up, right? That's like the big conversation going on. One journalist in particular that I think puts it pretty well. Her name is Mary Papenfuss, who wrote an article for Huffington Post titled "Fake Christian Trends on Twitter as Critics Skewer Chilly Mike Pence at Margaret Center." I think a title that's too long, but I'm not an editor.
Get him one of those space blankets.
Yeah, that's right. So Papenfuss says this: Vice President Mike Pence, who has called his Christian faith a dominant influence in his life, skipped expressing Christ-like compassion Friday at a jam-packed Texas immigrant detention facility where men in cages shouted that they were hungry and hadn't been allowed to bathe for weeks. Right, so this is the kind of the sentiment that is on Twitter, and it's, I think, pretty understandable, right? Mm-hmm. He's a Christian. He's supposed to be extremely religious, right? So religious that he can't even be in the same room with another woman who isn't his wife.
Yeah, that's right.
The weirdest thing I've ever heard. Someone who's supposed to take their faith extremely seriously. But in light of this, people started, the Twitter conversation shifted though, and they're like, well, he's not acting very Christian-y, right? Like, what are Christians supposed to do? They're supposed to be like Jesus and act in a certain way. So, out of this kind of like, like out of the friction of like being a Christian, but not doing a supposedly Christian thing, a lot of people started using the hashtag fake Christian. Right. It's a confused hashtag that I think has some problems to it that we're going to explore here in a minute. Hashtag fake Christian is just full of like posts that question Mike Pence's religious commitments and like, you know, what does it really mean to be a Christian if you're not going to do the Christian things? You know, it's this kind of like old conversation about orthopraxy and orthodoxy, right? Does being a Christian mean believing the right thing and doesn't matter what you do, or the opposite, or some kind of sentiment of both or whatever. But anyways, for example, if you were looked at that hashtag, you would see a tweet that sounds something like this. This is from Brooklyn Dad. Brooklyn Dad quotes Leviticus 19:33 and 34, where he says, "When a foreigner resides among you in your land, do not mistreat them. The foreigner residing among you must be treated as your native born. Love them as yourself, for you were foreigners in Egypt." And then he said, Brooklyn Dad goes on to say, "Someone remind hashtag fake Christian at VP Mike Pence, please." Right. So this is like I think this is an important setup. There's a sort of rhetorical form to this thing that's going on with Mike Pence that is worth paying attention to. That like on Twitter, on Facebook, on social media platforms, on journalistic articles, the idea is that Mike Pence isn't acting accordingly, and that there's this like kind of gotcha moment where it's like, you're a hypocrite because you're not doing the things that we think Christians ought to do. Like, that somehow this like hypocritical gotcha moment will somehow change his mind, or I don't really know what the intention is. Like, Mike Pence obviously doesn't think he's a fake Christian.
Right.
Even though people on Twitter are yelling at him.
Right.
This, like, this thing about, like, fake Christians or, you know, these gotcha moments of hypocrisy are a thing that, like, I mean, I've probably always been kind of a part of the discourse about politics and religion, but you definitely see more and more frequently on Twitter because of, you know, different things. Especially, like, you know, when lots of the abortion ban stuff happened, you'd see people kind of do these, like, you know, these gotcha things to evangelicals and trying to get one over on them.
Yeah, like the pro-life thing, right? You're pro-life in this way, but not when the baby comes out of the womb or something like that. Yeah, it's a pretty common rhetorical trope, and on the one hand, you get it because people don't like hypocrisy. I don't like hypocrisy. When people say that they're going to do one thing and they do something else, that's really troubling and annoying and frustrating, and it's especially bad when it affects people's material lives and they cover that over with some claim to follow a religion that says it's compassionate, etc. You can understand the impulse underneath that. But I think one thing that we can call attention to, and we'll get more into it in a minute, is how that sort of misses the whole issue that's being presented when someone like Mike Pence, who says he's a Christian, sees a bunch of people suffering in cages and thinks, actually, this is fine. The point being, he's not being not a Christian per se, so much as he's being a Christian in a bad and dangerous way. And we'll talk about why that's important in just a minute.
Yeah, totally. So, I mean, the impulse to call Pence like a hashtag fake Christian is fine, right? Like, it's the expression of a certain type of, like, frustration with the situation. And, like, you know, people are going to express frustration in however they want. But rhetorically, while it might, like, make you feel good, right? It's, like, good to yell at somebody and tell them how much they suck. I'm for that.
We do it enough ourselves. Yeah, no doubt about that.
Absolutely. So rhetorically, there's like some strength, but like logically, it has a lot of problems. And I think we'll end up doing more harm than good if we let that sort of form the way we think about evangelical Christianity.
Yeah, and our own Christianity too.
Yeah, absolutely. I think it's bad.
Yeah.
The fake Christian versus real Christian is a rough one.
Yeah.
Like, you know, okay, so rather than saying that he's like a fake Christian, just like you said, Dean, we should think about the ways that he's actually doing something profoundly Christian to oppress people, especially for being like a different race, for having sort of the, you know, the markers of different nationality and so on, like, is a thing that Christians have done for a really long time. If you don't believe that, then you need to learn about Spain. Medieval Spain is where all the answers lie.
You can go even earlier than that, as, for example, Amaryah Armstrong has told us, right? All the way back to Paul, if you want. Yeah,
that's totally true. I mean, the history of Christianity and the way that it thinks about race and identity and true Christianity is pretty ugly.
Yeah.
And, you know, like, the impulse, I think, especially within evangelicalism, right, is about trying to find a pure Christianity that gets around some of, like, the bullshit of, you know, Catholicism or mainline Christianity, right? We want to get around these, like, gatekeepers that read the Bible for us, and we want to have that true, authentic belief or whatever. But I think when it comes down to it, what we find is not, like, one Christianity, but many, and no true Christianity at all, just lots of weird failures and maybe some successes too, but a lot of failure.
Yeah, well, and it's also just many, many different kinds of Christianities that are sometimes at odds with one another, or sometimes at odds over this issue and not that other issue or something like that. But very rarely, I think impossibly personally, could you ever find two discrete separate kinds of Christianity where one seems true and one seems false. It seems better to say they're all different. So maybe one way to kind of get into this conversation more is to think also about the rhetoric that just surrounds conservatism and morality and religion in general. So, for instance, kind of tied into all this is an article by Renee Graham in the Boston Globe called The Immorality of Mike Pence. And it's not like a bad article overall, but the main thrust of the argument kind of repeats some of these points that we're getting at, and I think it gives us a chance to widen the scope. So the article points us in this direction, thinking about Pence's white supremacist Christianity specifically, right? Like, you could probably say that. He has a Christianity that is white supremacist.
Yeah, and that's a true, authentic Christianity.
Yes, exactly. And unfortunately.
One of the many.
Yeah. But that frames Pence's Christianity as something that sort of masks his immorality, right? So this is, on this take, his Christianity is the thing that kind of goes in front of all the non-Christian things underneath it. And I think that's dangerous because The fact is, it stems from Mike Pence's Christianity that he would do all of these things that this author thinks are wrong or immoral or even non-Christian. And it's an important point to make because it's not the case that when people are being repressive or creating these oppressive structures that they're just denying people's freedom or, coming down on you or something like that. They're trying to build society in a certain way, according to a certain set of ideas about how the world works, and in Pence's case, about how God and humanity should relate to one another, for example. All kinds of things that are going into this, and of course many material issues as well, class interests, racial interests, all that kind of stuff. And I think it's important to recognize how Christianity gets worked into that. Like, it's part of this constructive process. And if we do that, it allows us also to think better about how to resist those kinds of things along the lines of constructing something different, right? Not just like #resist or negate this or that other thing, but instead, like, what kind of world do we actually want to replace this one? What kind of constructive ways of putting society together could we think of that would replace these other constructive ways of putting it together? So we're not making an appeal to a natural order or natural freedoms or something like that, but talking more about different kinds of ways of thinking about the world.
Yeah, totally. And I think, like, well, like, what's interesting, though, is that, like, the point is not to... Okay, hang on. So in this, like, conception of Christianity, like, that we got going here, right? There's not... Christianity's not one, but it's like all of these different formations of Christianity. And sometimes they're tangled up with one another, and sometimes they're completely divergent, and sometimes they look like nothing alike one another, right? Like the Christianity that I would want to practice shouldn't look anything like Michael Pence.
Right.
And I hope it doesn't. But, probably moments of bias. And
yeah.
All I'm trying to say is people suck, and I'm one of them. But anyways, but the point is not to just, like, take a look at Mike Pence's evangelical Christianity that makes white supremacy an operating principle and try to find ways to reform it. But the point is instead to, like, find ways to take that apart completely. Destroy the whiteness in Christianity. Destroy evangelism, like an evangelistic Christianity that has white supremacy in it. So I think, like, that thinking about Christianity is not one and instead a bunch gives us these, like, these options to think about starting points and, like, characteristics of them and, like, why some Christianities look different than others. And we don't have to do this whole thing about authority of, like, who actually counts or something. Like, like, we could even do that, right?
Yeah.
I mean, it's, like, so weird, too, because it's, like, the Pope in Catholicism can, like, excommunicate somebody or whatever. But, like, if you're a weird guy like Mike Pence, or even if you're a weird guy like me, it doesn't matter at all. Like, just excommunicate me, it doesn't matter.
Yeah.
It's fine. I'll just go to a different church.
Right.
So anyways, I think that this way of thinking about Christianity as, more plasticky or bendy or, is important to thinking through the ways that Christianity ends up being deployed in the world and, like, what it can actually do. Like, what's the potential of that thing?
Yeah. Well, that's a good way to start talking a little more about how to theologize all this stuff, which is dangerous territory for us. We're not theologians, as we like to say all the time. But we talked to a few of them, and we like a couple of them.
I've literally read one book of theology. It's Marika Rose. It's the only one that I think I need to read.
It's the only one everyone needs to read for now. So Marika Rose is a theologian that we had on the show a couple of weeks ago, and I think that she can still help us think through this problem specifically. She offers us a lot of tools to think about it. So just to set it up a bit, we talk a lot about resisting purity narratives on this podcast. Both in terms of Christianity and politics, right? Like, there's a way of saying that your faith tradition or your political stance is pure from all the evil that has been done in the name of that thing. Mm-hmm. So, in the case of Christianity, it's this fake Christian idea, right? That, well, Mike Pence can't be a real Christian because real Christians wouldn't do that. But that ignores the fact that real Christians have done that for quite a long time. They built a whole world doing that.
And in some ways, it's, like, really baked into Christianity.
Right, exactly. And then there's lots of ways in which this happens on the left, too. That, like, my communism is not the communism of X, Y, or Z, and I don't have to deal with it.
Yeah.
Like, I'll never have to think through those complicated problems.
You're wrong.
Yeah, exactly. So we don't like those. All that to say, the purity narrative is too simple and also kind of dangerous. One reason that it's been helpful for us to talk to Marika is that I think she shares that conviction, but she has ways of thinking about why Christians sort of create those purity narratives. So it's not as simple as not wanting to be associated with somebody, but there are some deeper motivations to that too. So when Marika says something like, Christians have a problem with innocence, that's a big thing that she gets into. She's trying to say that we kind of don't have the luxury of cutting ourselves off from all of the guilty Christians that we don't like. Instead, we have to take that all on board. And that sucks because we don't want to, right? We don't want to be lumped into the same kind of Christianity as Mike Pence, or pick your bad, evil Christian in the world,
Joel Osteen.
Yeah, Joel Osteen, Rod Dreher. But
there's
also,
too many to name.
Yeah, I mean, even like the legacy of Christian slavery, or, these huge meta things, like we want to see ourselves as not part of them, but Marika says we should. Unfortunately, we shouldn't endorse those things by any stretch, but we have to recognize that we're not separate from them. And I think that's a really important way to get into the conversation, by taking on board the fact that we're, unfortunately, for better or worse, definitely for worse in this case, in the same boat as Mike Pence.
Yeah, it's actually, it's just such a hard thing. I get this, you get this, because we're scholars. We know,
yeah,
right?
We have pieces of paper that say.
It says scholar on it. But it is, a really difficult problem that I don't want to write off too easily either, because, the entire reason we have things like denominations or, specific, or why we associate with specific historical movements of Christianity, why people are Mennonites or Catholics or Methodists or whatever, is because that at one point, that group of people were like, well, this is what it actually means to be a Christian.
Right.
And these other people, they don't know.
Right.
So it's it's this hard problem because, if you want to say, well, there's actually a lot of different Christianities and it can look a lot of different ways and people screw it up constantly, including you. It's hard because it does call the entire identity of Christianity into question, right? If all of a sudden that we all are a part of the bad stuff and not just the good stuff, we're all in trouble.
Yeah, you can't just cut yourself off and make a new denomination where there's no Mike Pence's.
Right. It's actually kind of funny because, the conservative Christians are always well, liberal Christians just want to cherry pick the Bible.
Yeah.
But I think it's actually the opposite. Everyone cherry picks the Bible, first of all. And good. You should. There's stuff in the Bible you should never want to quote.
Yeah.
And there's stuff in the Bible that you should definitely quote.
Yeah.
Like James.
Yeah.
But at the same time, we not only do we want to cherry pick the Bible, but we also cherry pick history. But we shouldn't cherry pick history, right?
Right.
Cherry pick the Bible all you want, with full recognition that there's bad stuff in there. But you can't cherry pick history and say, well, I'm not a part of that Christianity, because actually you are.
Right.
It's actually a really weird thing too. You can't say that you're a part of the new evangelical covenant of God or whatever, and not recognize in some ways how everything that you're doing now is totally influenced by a weird genealogy of other Christians trying to get it right and just sucking at it.
Yeah. No, I think that's exactly right. Well, Marika contextualizes all of these kinds of responses to a broader historical issue with Christianity, namely that Christians basically built much of the modern world in the West in particular, and also many other places too, sometimes more intensely than others, but nevertheless, we Christians, there's very few places in the world that Christians didn't touch and then completely make over one way or another. But nowadays, things are changing, right? And Marika opens her book, A Theology of Failure, by saying, no matter how you look at it, theology failed. Maybe it failed to install the kingdom of God on earth that people thought they were going to. Maybe it failed to be the voice of goodness and reason in history. However you want to cash it out, whether you're a reactionary or a radical lefty, it failed, right? No Christian vision has really sort of won. It's this really contentious thing in space today. And she says there are kind of three ways of reacting to this, and I think they're really, really useful for the conversation we're thinking through now. So on page 2 of her book, right away.
As far as I got.
Open it. Yeah, that's right.
No, just kidding.
Well, if you only got this far, it would still be very helpful.
Probably.
She says this: faced with a world in which the secular threatens to escape its grasp and become truly independent of Christianity, in which the voices of those whom it has oppressed rise up to challenge its dominance and stand in judgment upon it, Christian theology can seek to recolonize those people and places that have escaped from its grasp. That's the first one. It can try to make itself clean once again by purifying itself of the taint of Christian history. That's what we've just been talking about. Or thirdly, it can confront instead its own failure. So Mike Pence, I think it's safe to say, is in that first category in a certain way, right? There's lots of different ways of being in that. But he tries to, put all of white Christianity's victims back in their place. The people who are driven from their home by Christian imperialism, the people who don't enjoy the privileges of white Christianity because they're Christians of color or people of color. Mike Pence wants to put them where they belong, and that is in camps for him. And that's the kind of thing that protects white Christianity from its others, right? It's built on that exclusion, and he wants to keep that exclusion going, even if he's excluding other Christians. So we can talk more about that in a minute, but the liberal or progressive kind of Christian response we've been talking about, I think fits somewhat into that second category, trying to be clean or purified from Christian history. So for them, Mike Pence can't be a Christian because that would mean they're part of the same faith tradition, part of that dirty Christian history. It comes from an understandable place, like we've been talking about. Like, people don't want Jesus to get associated with putting people in prison, and that's good. Like, I don't want him to be associated with that either. I don't think Jesus would be into it, obviously, right? But it also stops people from recognizing things like Christian privilege or Christian supremacy in society. And even more, I think that it has the danger of repeating some of the exclusionary ways of thinking that Christianity engenders in people like Mike Pence in progressive Christianities too, right? So this you see especially in liberal Christianities, I think, where they're willing to be critical up to a point and then not so much. So they might say something like, these camps are an abomination. What we need is to get them lots of toothbrushes, right?
Right.
So they don't necessarily reckon with the idea that there has been a total exclusion of a whole group of people for specific reasons. It's the inhumane treatment of them that they don't like.
Right.
And that's an unfortunately very Christian way of thinking about how to solve a social problem. And it's one that progressive Christians can absolve themselves of thinking is bad because someone like Mike Pence is so much worse.
Yeah, I mean, if all this Mike Pence talk is rubbing you the wrong way, we're just taking easy pot shots at some dude. I mean, Hillary Clinton, you can say a lot of the same things about her, right? She's a Methodist and a progressive mainline Christian, but also does, the same dumb Mike Pence stuff.
Right. I mean, she was even, in the last election, right before the campaign got into full swing, she was wrestling with how she thought about a place like Honduras, for example, which the United States actively, not too long ago, under Hillary Clinton's watch, intentionally got rid of a lefty, social, progressive kind of government and installed a right-wing government that has been brutal and has caused lots and lots of people to start migrating to the U.S., right? So it's the direct fallout of a liberal kind of Christianity that has created at least some of the roots of the migration problem that conservative Christians are inheriting now.
Yeah, well, maybe we should talk about that third type of Christianity. The good one.
The good one.
The good one, but the one that's also the most challenging.
The super hard one.
It's good and hard.
Yeah.
It doesn't actually... It's not an easy answer. It's
no.
Why it's awesome.
Yeah, it's more like a task that we have to set before ourselves,
yeah.
I think. So, it's not a secret that we dig Marika's third kind of approach here, which is a theology of failure. And that's where Christians have to admit that we failed and also try to confront that failure in a number of ways. Marika even goes as far as to talk about dismantling the church out of love for the church. So you recognize that the church has failed so intensely that there's no reforming it. You've just got to abolish it.
Yeah.
That might be a lot for some people, and that's fine.
It's a lot for me, but I'm sympathetic.
Yeah, I get it.
Because I don't want to go to church in the morning.
That's right. Soul's alive. So we can talk more about that. People can keep on talking about that. But whatever you think of it, I think what she and other people that we like talking to are good at talking about is that if Christians want to address this violence that's done by other kinds of Christians, we can't just assume that we're separate from it or not benefiting from that violence. And that should lead us to some kind of radical conclusions, whatever we think those are. And those conclusions have to come from a place of recognizing that Christianity itself is riven with contradictions and also actively building a world of oppression every day. And it's one that people who say that they're Christians are tying themselves to one way or another.
Yeah, this is an unprepared statement and off the cuff, so maybe it's bad. You'll tell me, Dean.
This is a poop emoji ice cream prepared statement.
That's right. Well, thinking about Christianity that way, and that it's failed, and that you have to deal with that failure. It doesn't mean not being a Christian anymore, right? It just means doing Christianity in light of its extremely oppressive and sucky features. It reminds me a lot of this other thing, this other philosopher named Gianni Vattimo, who's like an Italian philosopher and has some pretty weird politics, to say the least.
Yeah.
Anyways, he wrote this book. He's like really influenced by Derrida, and he wrote this one book called Belief.
Yeah.
And he has this whole thing though that's about weak faith, and you know, it's really, I guess the thing that makes it seem similar is it's like you have to recognize all of the really bad stuff that you know Christianity has done. But you keep doing it, but with a sense of weakness, where you like definitely could be wrong. I guess it's just like a sense of humility, or like an epistemic humility when you're doing Christianity. That like, you know, you can keep doing Christianity from the perspective that you think is good and the one that is like convicting for you, but also like do it very carefully because you probably suck at it.
Yeah, I think it's an interesting connection to make. Marika herself talks about Caputo in her book,
right,
who has a really similar thing, and he does weak theology and all that kind of stuff too, although there are differences between him and Vattimo, whatever.
The good thing about Vattimo is that his books are way shorter.
His books are way shorter and way easier to read.
Yeah.
But one thing, okay, so I learned a lot from all those people, all the deconstructive Christian types, I guess. Yeah. But where I think they have a big blind spot, and one thing that Marika pulls out, is actually they kind of ironically miss a lot of the material problems that Christianity not only produces, but reproduces. And so they get at a lot of the kind of patterns of thinking that Christianity produces and reproduces, and they throw a wrench in there. But even someone like Vattimo, who is a certain kind of communist.
Right.
Asterisk, asterisk, asterisk.
A weak communist.
Yeah, yes, exactly. Even he has a hard time, I think, connecting the material dots. And Marika is, like, really good at sort of forcing their hand anyway and being like, well, you know, is this really enough to dismantle the stuff that we've built?
Yeah.
All that to say, a good connection, but one for some productive agreements and disagreements.
Yeah, I think so. I mean, I don't really know what to think about it either. It just was the connection I made in my mind.
Yeah.
I mean, it just becomes one of those things where, like, you know, okay, so if you're going to do Christianity in light of its failures, and, like, you're still committed to doing it, it just means that, like, the project of, like, Christianity, whatever that really means for you, is one that is, like, uncertain, right? Like, it's totally, like, you know, if you're a Christian, there are a whole lot of different things you could believe eschatologically, right? But like, you can still believe that like ultimately God saves everybody, and that like in one way or another, you know, God through Christ will redeem all of humanity. I mean, like whatever, we hope so, right? But it's never sure that like the church will actually do any of that.
Right, for sure.
And I think that's like a troubling idea, but also a really important one to recognize that like, whatever you're doing, I guess all I'm trying to say is, whatever you're doing at your church, it might be cool, it might not be cool, but maybe it won't work, you know? And I guess that's a bummer.
And the other challenging part is, like, maybe it will work, and it will create problems that you didn't think that it would.
Yeah, totally.
That's the other challenging bit. Like, what's so great about Marika's approach is the premise that you're always going to be failing is basically a really... I don't think it, like, insulates you from, you know, making mistakes. But on the contrary, it affirms that you will make mistakes, and it does a good job of allowing you to sort of do something and recognizing that in doing it, you're not actually saving the world, or you're not creating a final solution to a problem that will never have its own problems or accidents.
Yeah, it also makes me think, too, of, like, well, I don't want to, like, get into the specifics of the situation I'm in.
Yeah.
But, like, you know, sometimes in Christian institutions, whether it be churches or whatever, some of the failures end up coming from the sense of like longevity or needing to survive rather than just like letting it die because it did fail or whatever, right? So it's also the sense in which like whatever you're doing might be important or it might have been good for a while, but like if it dies, it dies, and like there will be some other Christian institution that does something else later, so just like chill out about it.
Yeah, it's true, for sure. Yeah, a lot of Christians have trouble having the courage to accept that maybe it's good that they failed one way or another.
Yeah, or that like their failure isn't the end of Christendom.
Yeah, right.
Or if it was, maybe it'd be good. But
yeah, well, their failure should be the end of Christendom, I guess.
But what I mean is it's like not the end of Christianity.
Yes, that's right. Yeah, sure. Well, one thing that Marika does at the end of her book, if you get that far.
I did.
Yeah, is to suggest kind of a lot of these different ways of thinking too, right? She talks about what it would mean to still call yourself a Christian with all of this in mind, taking all these things on board. And she has this really neat prompt for thinking where she says, what might Christianity become if we begin to think theologically from the position of the heretic, the witch, the slave. So from the position of all these people that have been excluded historically by Christianity. And I think in this case, it's really helpful to extend that to say, you know, what could Christianity be if we thought theologically from the position of a detained migrant or a prisoner or a deportee, you know, somebody whose residency status is vulnerable or without citizenship. What would Christianity look like to think of it from there? I think that's a really useful way to just start thinking of Christianity differently, because it would lead you to a lot of different conclusions.
Right, like you might not care so much if Mike Pence is a Christian or not.
Yeah, exactly.
You might care more about liberation.
Right. So I think that's exactly the kinds of questions that are brought up by this, right? Like, well, maybe it would change the way you think about resisting other Christians. So you don't resist them by talking about fake Christianity and real Christianity. You resist them by talking about incarceration. You know, things that it's a Christian logic that has Christian roots. And maybe Christians are uniquely able to interrogate those roots some way or another, but maybe they're also not. Maybe they just need to be abolitionists, and that's it, right? There's nothing specifically Christian about it. Just get into it, you know? I think that it's helpful to change the conversation in that way, because you can also start talking about the material causes of these forms of suffering. They're not necessarily just theological, though there are theological reasons for it. It isn't, the big problem is not that Mike Pence is or isn't a Christian. He doesn't think that you're a Christian, probably, most likely. You know, if you really ask him flat out to be honest.
If you listen to this podcast and you're like, Mike Pence, am I Christian? He'd be like, oh, no.
Yeah, probably not.
And then he'd be like, why are you in the same room with me? Where's my wife?
Yeah, exactly. If you're a woman, that's for sure.
Help!
He's got to pull that ripcord.
The communists are here!
Yeah, the eject button that gets him out of all these situations. But I think at the end of the day, that doesn't matter, right? Whether or not he's a Christian doesn't matter, because it's not about him being a fake Christian. It's about him creating a situation that tortures vulnerable people.
Yeah,
that's what's bad.
Exactly.
The hypocrisy, who cares? Like, we're all hypocrites one way or another, you know? And it's not to excuse it or to say that this means that Jesus would or endorse Pence, and, you know, nobody's saying that, but I think it just changes the terms of conversation and also the terms of organizing.
Yeah, I think so. It also means that, like, you know, if we're willing to just say that, okay, Mike Pence is a Christian and he's doing something extremely bad right now, if we claim him as a Christian, it means that Christians can, like, deal with the problem too.
Yeah, for sure.
Right, because, like, whose problem is he if he's not a Christian? Like,
right.
What, is someone going to arrest him? Is, like, a different religious group going to deal with him? No, if he's saying that he's a Christian, like he is right now, and he's acting in this way, then, like, we should probably do something about it. We should figure out ways to organize against him specifically.
Yeah.
Not to kick him out of the church, but to, like...
Yeah.
Give him a swirly in the bathroom. To just give him a big wedgie next time he walks by your pew or whatever. Like, I don't know, but, like, he's a Christian problem. He's a problem that Christians made and that Christian thinking makes, and that like we should just take responsibility for.
Yeah. I mean, especially thinking about this today is important, because the day that we're recording this is also the day where it was a day of Catholic action.
Right.
And it wasn't just Catholics. There were lots of other people, too. There was a lot of Jewish activists and other Christians and other people there. But it was, in my own circles, the Catholic Day of Action is what's getting a lot of press. And if you didn't see, there was all kinds of priests and nuns and religious and lay people who are Catholic who were at the Capitol to make it clear that they were not okay with the detention of immigrants. And they drew on a lot of really interesting Christian imagery, and they brought pictures of children in detention, all this kind of stuff to try to provoke something. And a bunch of them got arrested, etc. And I think what's really good about that is that it's not just that these people are demonstrating a true Christianity or something against the fake Christianity of Pence. It's that they're demonstrating a different way of Christian engagement with migrants, right? It's one that says you shouldn't detain these people. That's a better Christianity than the Christianity of Pence.
Absolutely,
But it's not a truer or...
more authentic, historically connected or whatever. That's,
right.
No.
Right.
Genealogical, like, deriving authenticity from historicism or genealogy is a bad way of thinking.
Yeah, exactly. I think it's much more honest for us to just say we want this Christianity and not the other one.
Yeah.
So we're going to build this one and dismantle that one.
One time, okay, this is a wild aside, but I think proves the point. One time I wrote this paper. I took this class that was about the history of Islam.
Okay.
Completely out of left field.
Yeah.
Anyways, I said this one thing that suggested that because something was older, it was more true. And guess what my professor said? That's not true. So just because something seems older or ancient, or it's couched in the language of like, I don't know, of spirituality or whatever, doesn't mean it's more true or something, right? Like the Christianity of like Constantine or whatever isn't good or more authentic just because it's really old.
Right. Yeah, and even, the Christianity of, like, the apostles is not more authentic. Like, there were struggles in the early church over what it meant to be a Christian. And, I mean, anybody who gives an honest reading of the Bible, like, there's so many moments where Paul's like, I don't know what to do with this. Like, some people are saying that they're, like, following me. Some people say they follow Peter. And he's like, don't you know we all follow Jesus Christ? And it's like, good for you, Paul, but probably that didn't solve the problem. I mean, clearly it didn't, because there's lots of Christians running around today.
Yeah.
So, all the way from the beginning, right, Christianity as a social movement has had all the same problems as every other social movement. We can't get it together all the time. But that doesn't mean that we have the luxury of saying, well, we're not, we don't accept those other people as Christians. Like, we have to accept them as, like you just said, a Christian problem.
Yeah. Well, it's kind of interesting because, okay, we've been talking a lot about Mike Pence and Hillary Clinton once.
Yeah.
They're problems.
Yeah.
They're bad. We don't like them. Get out of here.
Sure.
Or get in here and let us give you a swirly. I guess is kind of that big point that I made.
Yeah.
But like Mike Pence and like elected officials aren't our only problems, right? Like the white evangelicals voted Trump in.
And so did white Catholics and, all down the line.
Yeah, for sure. So it's not that, like, Mike Pence is the problem, that he's the guy that we got to figure out, but it's also, like, everyone else.
Yeah, totally. It's our communities, our problems.
Yeah.
We need to try to figure out how to not just reform from the inside, but, like, abolish the structures that make them bad.
Yeah, so not only do we need to take responsibility for Mike, we're on a first name basis now. After I've been so mean to him, I'm just gonna call him Mike.
Yeah, fair enough.
Not just taking responsibility for Mike, but all the other like bad types of Christianity, all the other types of failures that we ought to recognize as such, and destroy. Yeah,
and I think that's too where even the experiment of this podcast has been illuminating for me anyway, of trying to talk to so many other people who are coming at this problem implicitly, maybe one from one direction or a different direction, from biblical studies or theology or anthropology or something like that. It's a thing that everybody kind of has to be experimenting with all the time, because as we ourselves, as progressive or lefty Christians, try to think about this, we're also reproducing all these patterns of thought that are Christian ways of excluding. I always think about that thing that Amaryah told us in her own, in the episode we did, in her own reading of that Paul verse in Galatians, where it's the one progressive love, right? There's no male nor female, Jew nor Greek, slave nor free, because you're all one in Jesus Christ. And she was like, yeah, people love that verse, but like the end of it's really dangerous. All one in Jesus Christ means if you're not in Jesus Christ, well, you don't get all these benefits. Right. And also, once you get in there, like, sorry, but they don't go away. In Christian communities, these things get reproduced all the time. So we have to think a lot harder about how, even the things that we seize on in progressive Christianities can reproduce patterns of domination on purpose or not.
Yeah, totally. It's just a good point out too that like just because now we've had this big meta conversation about Christianity, it doesn't mean now that like now we'll just do it right. No, it means that we'll keep screwing it up forever.
Yeah, exactly. Like it doesn't mean now we take up arms knowing full well that the Mike Pence Christianity must be destroyed. Right. It's like now we understand that like we're all going to mess up and like, oh no, we better keep working on this.
Yeah.
It's the fear and trembling thing, I think.
I think so too. Yeah. You do have to come at it with fear and trembling because you don't know exactly what you're doing.
Yeah. Yeah. Marika stuff, super helpful. Also just one more prompt for thinking, right?
Yeah. One more prompt for thinking. Cool, man. Think about all these episodes that we've done where we've gotten a lot out of Amaryah and Marika's work.
It's a lot.
Thanks. Thanks for writing these things that we can make a lot of content about. We've done a lot of content production here.
Yeah.
And I think we can be pretty proud of it.
I think so too. So we're going to actually kind of keep exploring this idea formally or informally for a little while over at least the next episode, maybe a few more down the line too, but definitely the next one. We're thinking about some different ways of working with the Magnificast to, stay with the theme longer than just pivoting to like a book we're reading or a person we want to talk to. And so at least next week, we're going to talk to Tad DeLay about a book he wrote about evangelicalism and why evangelicals think really weird stuff.
Yeah, it's a pretty cool book. I'm excited to talk to him about it. Yeah, it is. We're 122 episodes in, and we need to think about what we're doing with this podcast.
Yeah.
But it is really hard just because we're both so dang busy.
That's true.
It is very easy just to pick like a book every week and get into it. But maybe we can think of different ways to sustain the conversation to make them more fruitful and not just historical.
Yeah, and it's a good time to ask people, I guess, for some input. If you have ideas or things that you think worked really well or didn't work on the show or could work better, feel free to email us at themagnificast@gmail.com.
Cool. Thanks for listening to the Magnificast. If you like what you heard, you can support us on Patreon, patreon.com/themagnificast. So many people have been giving us money, and it's been extremely nice and cool for
really
them.
nice.
It's great. We have some big plans for that money, and, we'll tell you about it later. Not right now. A different time.
Yeah.
Anyways, the intro music is by Amaryah Armstrong. The outro music is by Theological Spoon. Catch you on the flippy flop.
Souls alive. Heaven come to earth and there won't be no church. We'll meet down by the riverside. There we'll swim with all creation. Never get tired, never bored. Don't worry, someday there'll be no dam between us and our Lord. Jackson, you keep your hoods up. Well, you keep your hoods up and you stay up late. In Jackson, you keep your hoods up. Well, you keep your hoods up and you stay up late. Oh, don't mind a cold night, but we might mind if you leave too soon. So come on now, it's still early.